options. Let's get into it. First up off the ranks is Seg, big boy. A lot of people's best boy, it seems, at the moment. They're ranking him quite high in pretty much every tier list. I can understand why. He's not a bad champion at all. He is one of the better. With 75% total attack and defense passive to your troops, he's great for a mixed team. Um, the skill, while it is high rage cost at 1000 and low damage coefficient at 360, doesn't have a max targets hit, and it does have a large area of effect. So that's going to add up, it's going to stack. It also doesn't say that the skills effects don't stack, so it's presumed that multiple segs will affect a target multiple times, which is great, and that all sounds wonderful. But the problem I have with Seg is kind of twofold. So the skill debuff of 150% health and defense to the enemy, as well as 30% attack damage increase and 50% counter damage increase, is really nice if it applies and if it stays on the targets. And while it may stack, if somebody's got a, say, 300% total attack, after 3 seg debuffs, they're down to 0, so I'm fairly sure they won't go into the negative after that point. But mainly the debuff cleanse from people like Annie, Lena. There's a lot of different options there for people to use cleanses. Now, if you take away that debuff, although it is excellent, you're really left with a high rage, low damage champion, even with the large area of effect. So it's something to really consider because he is great, but if you overuse him across your whole alliance, I think it's probably going to be detrimental, and you're going to lose balance. Andrea is up next. Usually one of my go-to girls for regular combat. Siege of Winterfell is a bit of a different story. So they've designed her to be a really niche commander. She's an infantry tank, heavy tank, effectively no skill damage at all. And she does increase stats quite substantially, but for infantry only. So her passive of 150% infantry attack, HP, and defense is potentially a good way to get stats back into a team that don't have your lord in it. The buff is an extra 200% to HP and defense for 4 seconds. Not the longest buff, but comparative to most, it's pretty standard. And she also reduces counterattack damage by 75%. Now, the percentage on that is quite high, so it's arguably a good skill, comparative. The issue I have with it is that because her role is so niche, she really is getting directly compared to other infantry tank commanders. Now, Chris, for example, his skill prevents attacks and counterattacks entirely. So you really don't need any attack reduction if they're just not attacking you at all. Same duration, better outcome, and his skill does damage in an AoE. So I'd say unless you're assigning roles to particular members in your alliance and trying to stack up their teams in such a way that they can be used in situational moments. For example, if you've assigned somebody a main tank role and you expect them to have 3 tank teams, then maybe she makes the grade. I don't necessarily think that's the best option, but it is an option. Other than that, she probably doesn't make the cut for me. Russell, ripper of a name, top bloke. I got nothing against the guy really. A lot of people aren't ranking him highly, so it's a little controversial, I guess. But as much as I said, niche roles are kind of detrimental in some instances, I think in this instance it's actually the opposite. If used correctly, he can be a really good champion on a really good team. And especially considering that there isn't that many cav attack options, then I think he really gets quite high up there on the list. So, quick rundown is 500 rage cost, which is one of the lowest, 600 damage coefficient, which is mid to mid-high. So the ratio is quite good. As well as that, he debuffs totals by 100% and reduces rage by 200. Now that is single target, so it's not comparable necessarily to Seg, but it is quite high, and if used correctly, quite useful. As far as mobility goes, if you build your team correctly, he's going to be able to get around the place and really target enemies. So you could use him as a flanker or a pincer attack against a specific target that you've identified as being high risk. Or to take out support champions, which are really going to cause you grief in a major combat situation. So if Russell can flank around to the side, pick out an Annie team, for example, and just hit on them quick and hard, then I think it's potentially a really good option. If he reduces the rage on an Annie, that means that she's not going to cleanse or heal as quickly. The negative 100% negate her totals. Um, and the low rage cost means he's just going to keep hitting until you have to back out. When you have to back out, they've got the mobility, so they should be able to back out, pick the next target, and get into the action quite quickly again. Rob, right, so it's probably not a good thing that we're talking about Rob directly after Russell, since I just gave Russ a bit of a big uppance. I don't think that necessarily means Rob's a bad option. I think they're not mutually exclusive, and especially for Cav teams, where again you don't have that many options. Not to say that everyone's going to use a full Cav team, but if you are looking for that high mobility flanking team, then you're probably going to have a couple of Cav on it. So, you know, between the two, they actually make a pretty good team. Russell's a good first option with a low rage cost. Rob's rage is 900, which makes him better suited to a second slot anyway. And his skill is perfectly suited to second slot. So he's got a damage coefficient of 600 for single target, but that triples when he hits a max of 3 targets to 1800. On the low end, that's reasonable. On the high end, it's actually quite high. But the main point for him is that his Dispel has a 100% chance to trigger. So other champions that have Dispels have a 75% chance or lower, whereas it's a guaranteed Dispel from Rob, which is a big deal. So not only does it make the enemy immune to future buffs, but it also removes all buffs. So by having him in the second slot, I think that actually makes his skill even more useful. If they've buffed from their first commander, it's then dispelled. If they're planning to buff from their third commander, it's not going to land. They're going to be immune to it. So second slot's really good. Russell suits the first slot. You know, it's kind of looking like a winning combination. 150% Cav defense and Cav health, as mentioned with Russell, it's not the most appealing, but it is stats, so why look a gift horse in the mouth? Last champ for episode 1 is Hayley. Once again, I think she's being pretty well underrated in a lot of ways. So it is true she's only got infantry attack increase of 150% for a passive buff, but she's got a lot of good points as well. So 650 rage cost is quite low, and more importantly, 1400 damage coefficient is quite literally one of the highest in game. So she's right up there, higher than Cersei, and some of the others that are being touted as real damage dealers. Now that's something to really consider, and something else to really consider is the fact that just because the skill definition doesn't define a hitbox, doesn't mean that it's a single target hit. So Miranda is another example of this, where the skill doesn't actually specify how many targets are going to be hit, but you'll notice quite clearly with Miranda that she hits nearly anyone in the general vicinity when she pops that skill. So you're just going to have to play around a bit and take some different champions out here and there and try and get an idea of how much range and how many people and targets they can hit with their skills. Because a single hit of 1400 isn't bad, but if she's going to be able to hit 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, considering she hasn't got a max target specified, then she's just going to be an absolute beast. Along with that, you got to consider what teams they're going in. So if you're building an infantry tank team, you're probably not going to need more than, a couple of infantry tanks. They've got the damage reduction covered. Someone like Chris also increases damage by 30%, so couple that with her, and you're going to be laying on some hits. Alrighty, that's episode 1 done and dusted. Obviously, I don't have any more information than anybody else, so it is just my personal opinions being voiced here. If you have anything to add, or if you disagree or agree, please do comment below. We've also got a gift code giveaway going on at the moment, so please do like, subscribe, give us a comment with your name in game, kingdom, and I don't know, a little something something. Cheers, guys.